Real stories of werewolves, of Dogman history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
Hey, we got another variety episode today with a bunch of strange stories. Let's kick it off with this one called Mental Transmissions from the Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've been watching your channel for a while now, and it's finally time for me to share my story. I'm what you might call an old man, 82 years old, living alone in a small house in the country. I've had my fair share of strange experiences over the years, but nothing comes close to what I've been dealing with lately. I hope you'll take the time to read this, because I need to tell somebody. About 6 months ago, I started experiencing something that I can only describe as mental transmissions. I know it sounds crazy, but it feels like something or someone is trying to communicate with me directly into my mind. At first I thought I was just losing it, but the more it happened, the more I realized it was something else, something real. It all began one night when I was sitting on my porch enjoying the quiet. I live in a pretty remote area surrounded by woods. That night, it was unusually still. No crickets, no owls, nothing. Just dead silence. Out of nowhere, I felt this intense pressure in my head, like someone was squeezing my brain. I closed my eyes trying to shake it off, and that's when I saw it. The Dogman. I'd never seen anything like this before. The creature had a head like a wolf, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. It was tall, standing on 2 legs, covered in dark matted fur. As soon as I saw it in my mind's eye, I knew it was real. The pressure in my head increased, and I started hearing its thoughts. Not words exactly, but feelings, images, emotions. The first transmission was chaotic, a jumble of fear, anger, and curiosity. It was like the Dogman was trying to figure me out, trying to understand who I was and what I was doing there. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just sat there on my porch feeling its presence in my mind. After what felt like an eternity, the pressure eased up and the connection faded. I was left shaken and confused, wondering if I'd imagined the entire thing. The next night, it happened again. This time I was inside reading a book. The pressure hit me hard, and I closed my eyes, bracing myself. The Dogman appeared in my mind clearer than ever before. It was standing in the woods watching me. I could feel its eyes on me, cold, calculating. The transmission was more focused this time. I saw images of the forest, felt the damp earth under my feet, smelled the pine and decaying leaves. It was like I was there, in its world. Over the next few weeks, the transmissions became more frequent and more intense. Every night, like clockwork, the Dogman would invade my mind. Each time the connection grew stronger, and the images and emotions it sent me became more vivid. I started to see things from its perspective, to see the world through its eyes. It was both fascinating and terrifying. One night I decided to try and communicate back. I don't know why I thought it would work, but I figured it was worth a shot. I sat on my porch, closed my eyes, and focused on the Dogman. I pictured it in my mind standing in the woods, staring at me with those piercing eyes. I tried to send it one simple thought, which was, "Why are you here?" To my surprise, the pressure in my head increased, and I felt a surge of emotion from the Dogman. It was a mix of frustration and desperation. I saw flashes of images. Dark woods, a moonlit night, a pack of wolves. I felt it longing for something, although I couldn't quite figure out what. The connection was stronger than ever, and for a moment, I felt once again like I was part of its world. The more I communicated with the Dogman, the more I felt I understood it. It wasn't just a mindless beast. It had intelligence, emotions, and a deep connection to the forest. It felt like it was protecting something, guarding its territory. I also felt its loneliness, a sense of isolation that mirrored my own. We were both solitary creatures, bound to our respective worlds. One night, though, the transmission was different. Instead of the usual images and emotions, I saw a specific place in the forest, a clearing with a large ancient tree in the center. I felt a strong urge to go there, as if the Dogman were calling me. I knew it was a risk, but curiosity got the better of me. The next day I set out into the woods, following the path I had seen in my mind. It wasn't an easy hike, but after a few hours I found the clearing. It was just as I had seen it in my vision. Quiet, eerie, and somehow sacred. As I stood there, I felt the Dogman's presence stronger than ever. The pressure in my head returned, and I closed my eyes, letting the connection wash over me. Dogman appeared in my mind closer than ever. I felt its breath, smelled its musky scent. It was right there with me, watching, waiting. I stayed in the clearing for what felt like hours, just standing there, connected to the Dogman. I didn't feel threatened, just a deep sense of understanding and respect. Eventually the connection faded, and I made my way back home. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Since then, the transmissions have continued, but they've changed. The Dogman no longer feels like a threat. Instead, it feels like we've reached an understanding. I still see the forest through its eyes. I still feel its emotions, but there's a sense of peace now. It's like we've formed a bond, an unspoken agreement to coexist. A couple of weeks ago, something happened that made me question everything, though. My daughter came to visit, bringing my grandkids along. They wanted to explore the woods, so I took them for a walk, showing them the places I used to play as a kid. As we got deeper into the forest, I felt the Dogman's presence, stronger than ever. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the kids, but it was hard. We reached the clearing with the ancient tree, and I felt the Dogman's eyes on us. The pressure in my head was almost unbearable, and I knew it was trying to communicate. I closed my eyes for a moment, reaching out with my mind. The Dogman sent me a clear message. Protect them. I opened my eyes, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. I kept the kids close, guiding them back toward the house. The Dogman watched us the whole way, but it didn't feel threatening. It felt like it was making sure we were safe. When we got back to the house, I felt a sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I know this all sounds crazy, but it's the truth. The Dogman is real, and it's been communicating with me. I don't know why it chose me or what it wants in the long run, but I've come to accept it. I still get the transmissions, but they don't scare me anymore. They become a part of my life, a strange but meaningful connection to the world around me. I hope my story can help someone out there understand their own experiences. If anyone else has had similar encounters, I'd love to hear about it. Maybe together we can make more sense of it. Thanks for taking the time to read this. Keep doing what you do. Harassed by a Dogman in rural Pennsylvania. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I never thought I'd be writing you, but I've been dealing with something strange and terrifying, and I need to share it with someone who might possibly understand. I'm an Australian native living in rural western Pennsylvania for my work. I'm renting a small house out here, and what's been happening lately is making me consider moving out as soon as I can. It all started about 3 months ago when I first moved in. I work in environmental consulting, and my company sent me out here for a project. The house I'm renting is pretty isolated, surrounded by dense woods. At first I thought it would be a nice change of pace from the city, but now I'm not so sure. The first couple of weeks were fine. It was quiet, peaceful even. Then I started noticing odd things happening around the property. At first it was just small stuff, strange noises at night, things being moved around outside. I figured it was just animals. I'm used to wildlife from back in Oz, so I didn't think much of it. But then, one night, I heard something that didn't sound like any animal I've ever heard before. It was a low guttural growl, and it seemed to come from right outside my window. I got up to look, but by the time I made it to the window, whatever it was gone. I couldn't sleep very well that night, and the next morning I found deep scratches on the side of my house. They were too high up to be from any normal animal, and those gouges were deep and rough. Over the next few nights, the growling became more frequent, and I started to see something moving in the woods. At first it was just a shadow, something big and fast. Then, one night, I got a clear look at it. I was sitting on the porch trying to relax after a long day. It was dark, and I was just about to head inside when I saw it. Two glowing eyes staring at me from the edge of the trees. The creature stepped out into the open, and I got a good look at it. It was tall, at least 7 feet, standing on 2 legs like a man. But it wasn't a man. It had a head like a dog or a wolf, with pointed ears and a long snout. Its body was covered in a dark matted fur, and its eyes were an unnatural yellow, almost glowing in the dark. It stared at me for a few seconds, and then it let out that same low growl I'd heard before. I was frozen with fear, but eventually, it turned and disappeared back into the woods. I couldn't believe what I'd seen. I've heard stories about cryptids and such, but I never thought I'd see one myself. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just a bad dream, but the evidence was piling up. The growling continued, and I started finding more signs of the creature around the property. Footprints, broken branches, more scratches on the house. One night, things escalated. I was inside trying to get some work done when I heard a loud crash outside. It sounded like something had slammed into the side of the house. I grabbed a flashlight and I went out to check, and that's when I saw it again. The Dogman was standing right by the porch, glaring at me with those glowing eyes. It was even closer this time, and I could see the muscles rippling under its fur. It looked angry, like it was warning me to leave. I backed up slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements, and I went back inside. I locked all the doors and windows, but I could still hear it out there, growling and scratching at the walls. I stayed up all night too scared to sleep. The next morning I found claw marks on the porch railing, and more footprints in the dirt. It was clear the Dogman did not want me here. I started carrying a flashlight and a sturdy stick whenever I went outside, but I knew it wouldn't do much against something like that. The harassment continued. Every night the growling and scratching got worse, and the creature seemed to be getting bolder. I could feel its eyes on me whenever I was outside. One evening I was taking out the trash when I saw it again. It was standing at the edge of the woods watching me. This time it didn't just stare. It started moving toward me, slowly at first, but then faster. I panicked and ran back inside, slamming the door behind me. I could hear it scratching and growling just outside, trying to get in. I grabbed a kitchen knife and stood by the door, my heart pounding. After what felt like hours, the noise stopped, and I finally dared to look outside. The creature was gone, but the porch was a mess, with deep gouges in the wood and overturned furniture. I decided then that I couldn't stay here much longer. I started looking for another place to live, but it's tough finding something on short notice in such a remote area. Meanwhile, the Dogman kept up its nightly visits, and I was getting more and more desperate. Eventually, things reached a breaking point. I was woken up one night by a loud bang, like something heavy had hit the house. I grabbed a flashlight and a knife, and I went to check. The front door was wide open, and the Dogman was standing in the doorway, its eyes glowing in the darkness. It stepped inside, and I could see it clearly for the first time. It was massive, towering over me, with long, sharp claws and teeth bared in a snarl. I backed away, holding the knife out in front of me, but I knew it was useless. The Dogman lunged at me, and I barely managed to dodge out of the way. I ran into the kitchen and grabbed a chair, holding it up as a makeshift shield. The creature slammed into it, knocking me back, but I managed to stay on my feet. I swung the chair at it. That gave me a few seconds to run out the back door and into the yard. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I jumped in and locked the doors, starting the engine as fast as I could. The Dogman was right behind me, running up to the car. I floored the gas pedal and sped down the driveway, not looking back. I drove into town and checked into a motel, where I've been staying ever since. I have not been back to that house. I'm not sure if I ever will. I'm trying to find a new place to live, but I can't shake the feeling that the Dogman might follow me. I don't know why it's targeting me, but it's clear that it does not want me there. I've heard stories about the Dogman before, but I never believed them until now. I really don't know what to do, and I'm at my wit's end. Have you ever heard of anyone else being harassed like this? Is there anything I can do to protect myself? I'm seriously considering moving back to Australia if this keeps up, but I don't want to let this creature drive me away. Thanks for reading my story. I hope someone in your audience can offer some advice, or at least help me understand this. Sincerely, Anonymous from Australia. The Dogman that haunts my family. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've been a long-time viewer of your channel and I finally mustered up the courage to share my story. I'd like to remain anonymous, but I'll tell you I live in northern Michigan. The story starts back when I was a child, at my grandfather's house. The first time I saw the Dogman, it changed my life in ways I still can't fully comprehend. I got punished for telling my parents and grandparents about it, and I was forbidden to talk about it again. The Dogman would appear to me periodically, and every time I got into trouble because of it. Here are 4 different times this happened. I was 8 years old the first time I saw the Dogman. My grandfather's house was a big old farmhouse surrounded by dense woods. My cousins and I loved playing there during the summer, exploring the forest and pretending we were adventurers. One evening, just before sunset, I wandered off a bit further than usual. I was fascinated by a small creek I found, and I was following it deeper into the woods, when I heard something moving behind me. At first I thought it was one of my cousins trying to scare me. I turned around ready to laugh, but then I saw it. Standing about 20 feet away was a creature unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was tall, standing on 2 legs like a person, but it had the head of a wolf. Its body was covered in dark fur, and its eyes were glowing yellow. I was frozen with fear, unable to scream or to run. This was a Dogman, and it just stood there staring at me. After what felt like an eternity, it let out a low growl. That broke my paralysis, and I turned and ran as fast as I could, back to the house. I burst into the kitchen breathless and terrified, and I blurted out what I'd seen. My parents and grandparents were sitting around the table. They all went silent, exchanging worried glances. My grandfather stood up and grabbed me by the shoulders. "You do not talk about that," he said sternly. "Do you understand me?" I was confused and I was scared, but I nodded. My parents looked angry, and I was sent to my room without dinner. That night I lay in bed, trying to make sense of what I'd seen and why my family reacted the way they did. A couple of months later, we were back at my grandfather's house for another visit. I tried to put the Dogman out of my mind, but it wasn't easy. One night I woke up to a noise outside my window. I got out of bed and peeked through the curtains. There, standing in the moonlight, was the Dogman. It was closer this time, right by the edge of the yard. I was terrified but also strangely curious. I watched it for a few minutes before it turned and disappeared into the woods. The next morning I couldn't help myself. I told one of my cousins about what I'd seen. She looked at me like I was crazy and ran to tell our grandmother. I got scolded again, this time by both grandparents, and I was grounded for the rest of the visit. A few years went by without any sightings, and I started to think that maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But when I was 12, we moved to a house not far from my grandfather's place. It wasn't long before the Dogman made another appearance in my life. I was walking home from a friend's house one evening, just as it was getting dark. I was taking a shortcut through a wooded area when I heard that same low growl. My heart started pounding, trying to locate the source of the sound. Then I saw it, partially hidden behind a tree. It was the Dogman. He was watching me, his eyes glowing in the dim light. I ran all the way home, bursting through the front door in a panic. My parents demanded to know what was wrong, and despite my better judgment, I stupidly told them. They were furious. My dad yelled at me for making up stories, and my mom sent me to my room. I was grounded for a month, 4 weeks, and wasn't allowed to see any of my friends. They told me to never speak of it again. The next and fourth time I saw the Dogman, I was 16 years old. By then I had learned to keep my experiences to myself. We were visiting my grandfather again, and I was in the barn helping him with some chores. It was late afternoon, and the shadows were growing long. And I turned to see the Dogman standing in the doorway of the barn. He was bigger than I remembered, and his eyes seemed even more intense. I froze, clutching the pitchfork I was holding. The Dogman took a step forward and I screamed, dropping the pitchfork and backing away. My grandfather came running, but by the time he got there, the Dogman was gone. He looked at me, saw the fear in my eyes, and his expression hardened. "You keep this to yourself," he said. "You hear me?" I nodded, but the fear and confusion were overwhelming. When we went back inside, I tried to act normal, but my parents could tell something was wrong. My dad took me aside and asked me what happened. I hesitated, but I stupidly told him the truth again. He got that same angry look, and he told me to stop with the nonsense. I was grounded again at the age of 16, and forbidden to talk about the Dogman with anyone. Now, the most recent encounter happened just last year. I'm in my 20s now, living in a small house near my childhood home. I had hoped moving away would put some distance between me and the Dogman, but I guess maybe it followed me. One night I was driving home from work. It was late, and the roads were empty. As I approached a stretch of road surrounded by woods, I saw something moving in the headlights. The Dogman stepped onto the road, turning to stare right at me. I slammed on the brakes and swerved to avoid hitting it, ending up in a ditch. I sat there, heart pounding, as the Dogman slowly walked toward my car. It stopped a few feet away, watching me. I fumbled for my phone and tried to take a picture. The Dogman dodged out of the way of my camera, but I knew it was still there, watching me behind the bushes. Giving up on taking a picture, I called my dad instead. When he arrived, the Dogman seemed to be gone, but the damage was done. My car was stuck, and I had to get it towed. I don't know why I told my dad what happened, but he got furious again. He accused me of being careless and making up stories. We had a pretty big argument, and I ended up going back to my house feeling more alone and scared than ever. Now, I've stopped talking to my family about the Dogman. They don't believe me, and it only causes trouble. But the encounters have not stopped. I see the Dogman in the woods near my house. Sometimes I hear it growling at night. It's like it follows me no matter where I go. I don't know if I'm being paranoid or if this creature has singled me out. I don't know what it wants. I've tried to find answers, but there is not much information out there. I feel trapped, unable to escape this nightmare that started all those years ago at my grandfather's house. I'm reaching out to you, Scary Stories, and your viewers, because I'm hoping someone hearing this might have experienced something similar. I need to know that I'm not alone, and I need advice on how to deal with this. Have you ever heard of anyone being targeted by a Dogman like this? Is there anything I can do to protect myself? Thanks for taking the time to read my story. I hope you can help me make sense of what's happening and find a way to deal with this terrifying part of my life. Signed, Anonymous.
Everybody wants a wooden cat. The scary stories, beanie hat. Everybody knows it's a natural fact. The scary stories, beanie hat. Link is in this video's description if all goes according to plan. Available in black, which is like every color all at once, man.
Dogman sighted during sleep paralysis. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I hope this email finds you well. I've been a fan of your channel for a while now, and I've always been fascinated by the stories you share. I never thought I'd have one of my own to contribute, but here we are. I want to share an experience that I had recently. It was terrifying, and I still can't quite wrap my head around it. A bit of background about me: I'm 24. I live alone in a small apartment, and I've never really experienced anything paranormal before. Sure, I've had weird dreams and the occasional odd noise in the night, but nothing like this. I'm writing this to you because I don't know who else to tell, and I think you might appreciate the details. This happened about 2 weeks ago. I had a long day at work and I came home pretty exhausted. I had dinner, watched a bit of TV, and went to bed around 11 p.m. I fell asleep pretty quickly, which isn't too unusual for me. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. At least I thought I woke up. My eyes were open, but I couldn't move. I've read about sleep paralysis before, and I knew what this probably was, so at first I tried to stay calm. My bedroom was dimly lit by the street lamp outside, and everything looked normal. I started to feel this overwhelming sense of dread, though. It was like something terrible was about to happen. My eyes were the only part of my body that I could move, and I was scanning the room as best as I could. That was when I noticed the closet door. I always keep my closet door shut, but now it was slightly open, enough that I could see the darkness inside. I tried to tell myself that I might have left it open, even though I knew I hadn't. The feeling of dread kept growing, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. As I stared at the closet, I saw something move. At first I thought it was just a shadow, maybe a trick of the light, but then I realized it was something more. 2 glowing eyes appeared in the darkness of the closet. They were bright, almost blindingly so, like 2 tiny flashlights. They were set wide apart, higher than a human's would be. I couldn't make out much else at first. My eyes were glued to those 2 glowing points, and the terror I felt was unlike anything I've ever experienced. Slowly, the figure attached to those 2 eyes started to come into view. It was tall, much taller than any person I know. Its head was massive and looked sort of like a dog's, with pointed ears on top and a long snout. The creature stepped out of the closet into the dim light of my room. I could see it more clearly now. It was covered in dark, matted fur and had a hunched posture, like it was ready to pounce. It stood on 2 legs, but they were bent in a way that reminded me of a dog's or a wolf's. Its arms were long and muscular, ending in hands with claws that looked sharp enough to tear through anything. It moved slowly, almost deliberately, as if it knew I couldn't move. It didn't make a sound, which somehow made it even more terrifying. It walked closer to my bed, and those eyes never left mine. They seemed to pierce right through me, and I felt completely helpless. As it got closer, I could make out more details. Its fur was patchy in some places, revealing rough, scarred skin underneath. Its mouth was slightly open, and I could see long, sharp teeth. I tried to scream, to do anything to get it to go away, but I was completely paralyzed. The dogman stopped right at the edge of my bed, just staring down at me. I could feel its breath on my face, hot and foul-smelling. I was convinced that it was going to end me. I don't know how long it stood there, but it felt like an eternity. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it started to back away. It moved back toward the closet, never breaking eye contact with me. It slipped backward into the darkness, and the glowing eyes were the last thing I saw before it disappeared completely. The closet door swung shut on its own, and I was left staring at the ceiling, still unable to move. Eventually I must have fallen asleep again, because the next thing I remember is waking up to my alarm. I jolted awake, drenched in sweat. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare, but when I looked at the closet, that door was once again slightly open. I've tried to rationalize what happened, but I can't. It felt too real to be a dream. I haven't been able to sleep properly since then, and I'm constantly checking my closet before I go to bed. I haven't seen the Dogman again, but the memory of it is enough to keep me on edge. I don't know if anyone else listening has had a similar experience, but I feel like I need to share this with you. Maybe someone else out there has seen what I saw, or maybe you guys can help me make sense of it. Thanks for reading my story and keep doing what you do.
Call you scary sticker man, yo.
Dreams about the Dogman and my brother's accident. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I never thought I'd be writing you, but I feel like I need to get this off my chest. I've been having these nightmares about Dogman. They're not your usual bad dreams. They're vivid and terrifying, and I wake up in a panic each time. I've had 5 different ones that I can remember clearly, and I want to share them with you. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar. In my first dream, I was back in my apartment, but it felt different. Darker, more oppressive. I was lying in bed unable to move, just like during a sleep paralysis episode. I could hear heavy breathing coming from my closet. The door creaked open and there were blindingly bright eyes looking at me. Then a Dogman stepped out, moving toward me with slow, deliberate steps. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. It reached the edge of my bed and leaned down, its breath hot on my face. Just as it was about to touch me, I woke up, drenched in sweat. So that was not sleep paralysis, but a dream about sleep paralysis. The second nightmare was even worse than that. I was in a forest, running as fast as I could. I didn't know what I was running from at first, but I could feel it gaining on me. The trees were dense, and the branches scratched at my skin as I tried to escape. I could hear growling behind me, getting louder and closer. I looked back and I saw the Dogman, 7 feet tall, covered in fur, its eyes glowing in the darkness. It was moving on all 4s, but faster than any animal I'd ever seen. No matter how fast I ran, it just kept getting closer. I tripped over a root. I fell hard, the wind knocked out of me. I rolled over just in time to see it pounce. Its claws extended toward me. Then I woke up, heart racing, feeling like I'd just escaped death. The third nightmare took place when I was visiting my childhood home. I was in the living room and everything seemed normal at first. My family was there watching TV and I felt a strange sense of comfort. But then the lights started flickering and the room grew cold. My family disappeared and I was left alone. The Dogman appeared in the hallway, its eyes shining brighter than ever. It walked toward me, its claws clicking on the hardwood floor. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. It reached out and grabbed my arm, its grip like a vice. I could feel the pain as its claws dug into my skin. I screamed and I fought, but there was no use. Just before it could drag me away, I woke up, clutching my arm where it had grabbed me. By this point, I was growing pretty stressed. The fourth nightmare happened in a city, but it was eerily empty. I was walking down the street, the buildings towering above me. There were no cars, no people. It was post-apocalyptic, silent. I felt like I was being watched. And when I turned around, the Dogman was there, standing in the middle of the street. Its eyes were like headlights, so bright that I had to shield my eyes. It started walking toward me, slowly at first, then faster. I tried to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. I stumbled into an alley, hoping to find a way out, but it was a dead end. The Dogman cornered me, its breath hot and rancid. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of sharp teeth, and it lunged at me. I woke up just as it was about to bite. Then the fifth nightmare was the worst so far. I was dreaming I was in my apartment again, but this time I was fully aware that I was dreaming. It was lucid dreaming. I tried to wake myself up, but I couldn't. I knew the Dogman was there, watching me from the corner of the room. It didn't move. It just stared at me with those piercing eyes. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, like something terrible was about to happen. The room started growing smaller and smaller. The walls of the apartment started closing in. The Dogman didn't move, but its eyes followed me everywhere I went. I felt trapped, suffocated. Just as the walls were about to crush me, I woke up gasping for air. These nightmares tormented me, but they seemed to lead up to something even worse, something that happened in the real world. A few nights ago, my brother was driving home late from work. He was on a quiet rural road when he saw something run out in front of his car. He swerved to avoid it and ended up crashing into a tree. He wasn't seriously hurt, but he was shaken up. He told me that as he sat there waiting for help, he saw the Dogman. It was standing by the side of the road looking at him through the window. Its eyes were just as bright and terrifying as the ones in my dreams. My brother said it felt like an eternity before the thing finally walked away when help arrived. He isn't sure, but he thinks the Dogman is what caused him to screech off the road. I can't help but feel like this is all connected. I keep wondering if it's my fault that this happened to my brother. Did my dreams somehow bring this creature into our lives? And if it could harm him, what's going to happen to me? I'm scared that the nightmares are just the beginning, and that something worse is coming. Have you ever heard of anything like this before? Is there something I can do to stop these dreams and keep my family safe? I feel like I'm losing my mind, and I don't know where else to turn. Thanks for taking the time to read this. I hope you or your viewers can offer some advice, or at least help me understand what's happening.
Find that link in the description, honey.
Chased to Work by a Dogman in rural Wisconsin. Hey, Scary Stories. I'm writing to you because I've been experiencing something really disturbing. I'm at my wit's end. I don't want to give you my name, but I'll tell you I live in rural Wisconsin. I recently bought a small house out here, hoping for a quieter life. Things have not gone in that direction. I am originally from the Midwest, although not here, but I moved here for a job at a local factory. The house I bought was a good deal, an old farmhouse surrounded by woods. I never had so much land before in my life. At first I thought it was perfect. Quiet, lots of space, and the kind of place where you could really unwind after a long day. But it didn't stay that way for long. A couple of weeks after I moved in, I started noticing strange things. It began with noises at night, scratching sounds, like someone was clawing at the outside walls. I thought it might be raccoons or some other animal. I'd go out with a flashlight, but I never saw anything. It kept happening, and I started finding marks on the house. Deep gouges that didn't match any animal I knew of around here. And then I saw it. One night, I was sitting on my porch after work trying to relax. The sun had just set, and the woods around the house were getting dark. That's when I noticed two glowing eyes in the tree line. At first I thought it was a deer or some other animal reflecting light, but the eyes were too high up and too close together. And then it stepped out of the woods and I got a good look at it. This creature was tall, at least 7 feet, and it stood on 2 legs. Its body was covered in dark, shaggy fur, and its head looked like a wolf or a large dog. It had long arms with claws that glinted in the dim light. It just stood there, staring at me with those glowing eyes. I was frozen, unable to move or make a sound. Then it growled, a low rumbling sound that I felt in my chest more than I heard it with my ears. I don't know how long we stood there, staring at each other, but eventually, I turned and disappeared back into the woods. I went inside, locked all the doors, and tried to convince myself that it was just a bad dream. But the next morning, when I found more scratches on the outside of the house, I knew it was real. Over the next few weeks, the creature kept coming back. Every night, I'd hear the scratching and the growling. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of those glowing eyes watching me from the woods. It was like it was trying to scare me, to drive me away. I started feeling like I was being watched all the time, even during the day. Things escalated even further about a month ago. I was leaving for work early in the morning just before sunrise. It was still dark out and I was half asleep as I got into my truck. As I was backing out of the driveway, I saw movement in my rearview mirror. The Dogman was there, standing right in the middle of my driveway. I panicked and I floored it, speeding down the road toward town. I kept looking in the mirror and to my horror, it was running after me. This thing is fast, much faster than any animal I've ever seen. It ran at first on 2 legs, its eyes glowing in the darkness, but then it dropped to 4 and got even faster. It stayed right behind me, no matter how fast I went. I felt like I was in a nightmare, like this could not be happening. I finally lost the creature when I reached the main road, and other cars started to appear. I think it veered off into the woods, and I made it to work in one piece, but I was a wreck for the rest of that day. After that, it started following me even more often. I'd see it in my rearview mirror on my way to work, or it would appear in the woods as I was driving home. I tried changing my route. I tried leaving at different times, but it always seemed to know where I was. I felt like I was being hunted. One night I stayed late at work, hoping that if I got home after dark, it wouldn't be there. But when I pulled into my driveway, there it was, standing on the porch like it was waiting for me. I sat in my truck too scared to get out. It stared at me for what felt like hours, then slowly walked off into the woods. I finally made it inside, but I couldn't sleep that night. The fear was just too much. I got a permit and started carrying a weapon with me, hoping it would make me feel safer. But even armed, I'm still terrified of that creature. I know it's not normal to be this scared, but I can't help it. That Dogman is relentless. It's like it's trying to drive me out of my own home. But I can't afford to move. I put all my savings into this house, and selling it would take time and money that I don't have. The worst night was about a week ago. I was getting ready for bed when I heard the familiar scratching outside. I tried to ignore it, hoping it would go away. But then the noise moved to the front door, louder and more insistent. I grabbed my weapon and went to check, my heart pounding in my chest. When I opened the door, the Dogman was standing right there, inches from the threshold. It snarled, showing its teeth, and I slammed the door shut, locking it as fast as I could. I backed away, but it started pounding on the door, hard enough that I thought it might break through. I opened the window and fired a shot through it. Then the noise stopped. I heard it retreating, fading into the night. I don't know how much more of this I can take. I'm scared to be in my own home, and I'm scared to leave it. I don't know what this creature wants or why it's targeting me, but I feel trapped. I've considered calling in the authorities, but I doubt they'd believe me, and even if they did, what could they do against something like this? Have you ever heard of anyone dealing with a Dogman like this? Is there anything I can do to protect myself or to drive it away? I'm desperate for any advice or help you can offer. I can't keep living like this, but I don't see a way out. Thanks for taking the time to read my story. I hope you can help me make sense of what's happening and find a way to deal with this nightmare. Signed, Anonymous.
If you want a coloring book full of monstrous delight, then give this a look. It'll give you a fright, right? Scary stories, coloring book, werewolf coloring book. And just to make your mind explode, it's a digital download. All it costs is $2.09, and then you will be feeling fine. Coloring monsters today, hey, it's a coloring book, hooray. Okay, link is in the description.
And our final story for this episode. My encounters with the Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've been following your channel for a while and I finally decided to share my story. I've had encounters with something I can't quite explain, something that goes beyond the ordinary and the paranormal. I live in western Pennsylvania, just outside of Pittsburgh. My story starts at our childhood home and continues to this day. I believe this creature isn't just an animal, but something far more intelligent and strange. I was 10 years old when I first saw the Dogman. My family lived in a small house on the edge of a wooded area. It was a typical suburban home, but the dense woods behind it always seemed mysterious and a bit scary to me. One summer evening, I was playing outside chasing fireflies as the sun set. I remember feeling a sudden stillness in the air, like the whole world had just paused. And that's when I saw it. At the edge of the tree line, partially hidden by the shadows, stood a creature unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was tall, standing on two legs like a human, but covered in dark, shaggy fur. Its head was distinctly canine, with pointed ears and glowing yellow eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. I was frozen with fear, unable to scream or run. The Dogman just stood there watching me. I felt an odd sensation, like it was trying to communicate with me without words. In my mind's eye, I saw glimpses of other realities, of cities on hills that were unlike any I'd ever seen on Earth. After what felt like an eternity, the tall creature turned and vanished into the woods. I ran inside breathless and terrified, and I told my parents what I'd seen. They didn't believe me, of course. They said it was just my imagination, and they sent me to bed. A few months later, I saw the Dogman again. This time it was late at night, and I was lying in bed, unable to sleep. I heard a soft rustling outside my window, and I got up to look. There it was, standing in the yard, looking right at me. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, and I felt that same strange sensation, like it was listening to my thoughts. I watched it for a few minutes, too scared to move. Then it did something unexpected. It raised a hand or a paw, and it seemed to point toward the woods. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to follow it. I grabbed a flashlight and I snuck out of the house, quietly making my way to the edge of the woods. The Dogman was waiting for me, standing just inside the tree line. It didn't move as I approached. It just watched me with those piercing eyes. I felt a mix of fear and curiosity, and a strange thought entered my mind. Tell me about your family. It was asking me about my family? I thought about my family and wondered what it wanted to know. Then another strange thought entered. Tell me about how they indoctrinate and train you for service. I didn't even know what that meant, but I found myself thinking about school, about my teachers, my friends, and the bullies. Then I sort of had a gestalt feeling or revelation, you know? Suddenly it was like I realized, he's here to study us, but not for conquest. He just wants to get ideas from us to use back in his reality. Now I know how insane that may sound, but that's what I felt in that moment. Sometimes I remember feeling like he was a sort of an anthropologist of other realities than his own. But other times it felt more like he was sort of a writer or a filmmaker who came here for ideas, for his plays or whatever they were. Now I don't think it's a direct comparison. I don't think the Dogman world has TV sets or stages or digital devices. But I do think they have conversation and art, sort of like how we do. Since I only ever saw the briefest glimpses of other realities when around him, I don't really know. I mean, I'm not even sure if the worlds I glimpsed were his world, or just others that he had visited in addition to ours. I stood there for a while, feeling like I was part of some silent conversation. Then the Dogman turned and walked deeper into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. I went back to bed, my mind racing with questions and fear. Years passed, and I tried to forget about the Dogman. I convinced myself that it was just my imagination, fueled by childhood fears. But deep down, I knew it was real. When I was in high school, I had another encounter that brought all those memories back. One night, I was coming home late from a friend's house. I was walking down a quiet street when I felt that same stillness in the air. I looked toward the woods, and there it was, standing at the edge of the trees. The Dogman seemed taller and more imposing than before, but its eyes were the same, glowing, intelligent. I felt a surge of thoughts and emotions that weren't my own. Images of strange landscapes, towering structures, and creatures that didn't belong to our world. It was overwhelming, like I was glimpsing into other realities. I realized then that the Dogman could hear my thoughts, and maybe even implant its own into my mind. I stood there, trying to make sense of what was happening. The Dogman didn't move. It just watched me with those eyes. I had the overwhelming feeling that it was studying me, gathering information. After a few minutes, it turned and walked back into the woods, leaving me standing there, shaken and confused. My most recent encounter happened just a few months ago. I had moved out of my childhood home, and I was living in a small house not far from Pittsburgh. I thought I had left the Dogman behind, but it found me again. One evening, I was sitting on my porch in my backyard enjoying the quiet. The sun had just set, and the woods around my house were growing dark. I felt that familiar stillness in the air, and I knew what that meant. I looked toward the tree line, and there it was, watching me. This time I wasn't as scared. I felt more curious than anything else. I walked toward the Dogman, and it didn't move. As I got closer, I felt that surge of thoughts and images again. This time they were clearer, more vivid. I saw scenes of a world that was not ours. Cities made of crystal, skies filled with strange creatures, and beings that looked like this Dogman. I realized then that the Dogman was not here to harm us. It's a researcher, a traveler from another reality, here to study us and gather ideas for whatever reason. I felt a strange sense of, connection. Like I sort of understood its purpose. It is here to learn. It's not here to conquer. We stood there for what felt like hours to me, just staring. Then, without warning, the Dogman turned and walked back into the woods. I felt a sense of loss, like I was saying goodbye to an old friend. I went back to my house, my mind filled with questions and strange thoughts. Over the years, I've come to believe that the Dogman is more than just an ordinary animal. It's intelligent, maybe even more so than us. It can hear our thoughts and communicate in ways we can't fully understand. I think it comes to our reality to observe us, to learn from us, and maybe even to use our ideas in its own world. I know how crazy that sounds, but I can't ignore the experiences I've had. Each time I see the Dogman, I'm filled with strange thoughts and images that don't belong to me. It's like downloading information into my mind, storing it for some purpose I can't comprehend. I don't think the Dogman is here to harm us. I think it's a researcher. In conclusion, I hope my story helps others who might have had similar experiences. I know how terrifying and confusing it can be, but I believe there's a purpose behind it. The Dogman isn't just an animal. It's something much more complex and intelligent. If anyone has encountered the Dogman or experienced similar thoughts and images, I would love to hear about it. Maybe together we can make sense of this mystery and understand what the Dogman really wants. Thanks for taking the time to read my story. I hope it helps shed some light on this strange and fascinating phenomenon. Signed, Anonymous in Western Pennsylvania. There can be no hawing or hemming. Our executive producer is Mr. James Fleming. Please join us in thanking today's executive producer, James Fleming, for making this episode possible. James is a member of our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com, and so he gets to see our 4 secret uncensored episodes that we do each month. James is a very special guy, not just a channel member, but we consider him a friend of the show. He's got surgery coming up this month, and we're praying for him. You're invited to join us if you do that, or to send kind thoughts his way in whatever way makes sense to you. He's a really good guy, and he's been following us since his woman, who was a subscriber as well, passed on from this world. James is one of the good ones, and we thank him from the bottom of our heart. Thank you, James Fleming, and good luck this month. To find out how you can join our channel memberships like James Fleming and get to see our secret stuff, Check out what this next little guy has to say. Henry? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.